Want to get ahead in digital-first content? The Drop is the go-to newsletter for industry professionals, delivering insider news, trends, and insights straight to your inbox. Navigate the fast-changing landscape of digital-first production, distribution, and monetization. Sign up now for free at dropmedia.co.uk and stay informed with The Drop. Hi, I'm Justin Crosby and welcome to another episode of Telecast with our new set. So I'm delighted to welcome Steve Ackerman, our guest this week, one of the UK's most influential audio execs, known for building Somethin Else into a leading force in radio, branded audio and podcasts before its acquisition by Sony Music, where Steve became Executive Vice President and Head of Global Podcasts, overseeing international podcast strategy, creative development and high-profile talent partnerships. Steve's career spans 2 decades of shaping audio IP development and cross-platform storytelling, giving him a front-row view of how the sector's evolving. And when you look at the audio landscape now and video podcasts, I mean, it's all merging. It's all a really exciting space. So first of all, Steve, welcome to the show. Delighted that you're joining us.
Thank you, Justin. And I appreciate you making me a lot younger because I think it's three decades, over 3 decades. So, but I'll take it. It's good.
All right, fantastic. Well, listen, you're obviously super well known in the US, in the UK podcasting space. And your time with Sony's just finished, hasn't it?
Has just finished two weeks ago.
Right. Okay. So, really thrilled that you can join us because there's so much knowledge that you've got of this, coming from really a sort of pure radio background, right? I mean, tell us a little bit about your career story, first of all. I mean, we were talking just off camera and you said you started at, was it Whips Cross Radio? Was your very first?
Whips Cross Hospital Radio when I was still at school. My mum and dad used to drop me down on Monday night to go and help. But yeah, so radio was the deep background. Started as a radio DJ and a journalist for the fledgling Radio 5. And then, became a producer and then exec producer and went that sort of route. And then obviously, eventually you suddenly find you're managing teams and running businesses and you're not in the studio at all. And the Something Else journey was one where, we started within radio, but you couldn't scale a business within radio. And even though we became really serious players in that space, there just wasn't the global market to really scale a business in that space. So we really evolved into a business that had always had audio very much at its heart, but had a big social media component and was doing a lot of online video and TV. And, I think I said to you before the recording, back in the day, no one quite understood what we were. We were a multi-content, multi-platform business, which obviously is exactly what many, many production companies are now. But back then, no one could quite understand us. And then, of course, when podcasting came along, because we had this huge expertise in audio, we were able to just jump on that really quickly and sort of seize that opportunity.
Yeah. I mean, when was it, when podcasting started to develop, become, something that really excited you? Can you think back to what was it about podcasting immediately that you saw an opportunity in?
Well, I think it was the obvious thing of the on-demandness of it. And, we were already at a point where TV viewing was clearly going that way. And I think it just felt pretty obvious that if you have the choice to listen to whatever you want to listen to, why would you just turn on the radio and hope you find something? And it's not that different from the exact mentality of, I think, what we've seen happen on TV. And then alongside that, it was also the fact that it really, I could see that for the first time, it was going to allow audio to be able to create IP and have an IP market in the same way that TV production had been able to do, and to be able to create ideas that could travel around the world in the same way that TV had been able to do. So it was those components really that stood out for me as really being transformative.
Yeah. And so Something Else grew. Gives us a sense of the scale that the business grew to before you sold to Sony, and give us a sense of what that deal was like and what that allowed you to go on to achieve.
Yeah, well, we got to a pretty decent size. We were turning over sort of healthy eight figure amount. We were obviously profitable, and then the Sony deal sort of came in 2 parts, because we had a very traditional or sort of well-trodden M&A route where we first of all got into bed with them from a production perspective. So they started funding all of our podcasts. And they did this with 5 or 6 companies around the world. We were one of 2 they were doing it with in the UK.
So they were outsourcing their production to you, essentially?
Well, so they didn't have any internal production. It was very much a music label approach, which was, we're going to fund all these other companies and we'll co-own the IP that comes out of those shows. So they shared ownership in our shows. They didn't have any ownership of our business. And after about 18 months, it was obvious the relationship was going very well. We were really succeeding for them. We were producing some really good hit shows, some large numbers from an audience perspective. And then they obviously said, well, we'd like to buy you now. So that was great. And the reason that they wanted to buy us, which obviously we didn't know at the time of the acquisition, was there was this aim to create a global podcast division and really cement Something Else as the sort of central component within that. So that happened, and part of that deal was the chance for me to go and work in New York and be based over there and build up the team in the States as well as maintain the team here, which I did.
Yeah. And it's interesting that you mentioned it was the music side of the business, the side of Sony, that acquired you, rather than the pictures television side of it. Whereas obviously we're now seeing a huge amount of mergers happening and acquisitions, like Global are going out and buying, obviously, Fellow Studios and other deals that they've done recently. It's kind of really interesting that we're seeing more and more traditional radio players getting into sort of video-led formats and podcast shows. I mean, and I suppose that was just back then, radio and music essentially were quite interlinked, weren't they? Traditionally, rather than this necessarily being as an opportunity for the TV part of the business.
Well, I think the driver then, and it's still relevant now, was that what podcast has done is it has eaten into share of ear against music. So in other words, obviously, if you're listening to lots of podcasts, your music consumption traditionally goes down, and you can see that pattern of behavior happening in almost every market. And what you see with podcast listening is once people start listening to podcasts, they really start listening to them. And, very quickly they can become a person who might consume 5 or 6 podcasts a week, depending on what their commute is. So the listening can be very heavy. Of course, we're not in a dissimilar position now, even with the video piece of the pie, which is it's another form of trying to gain share. And you can see how all the major streamers are really starting to take podcasting seriously. In fact, today, the day we're recording, is the day that Netflix have launched podcasts on Netflix now, with the shows that they've brought in from Spotify and iHeart and other folks. And I'm sure this is only the beginning. So it really becomes an equation of, what share are you trying to grab and how are you trying to grab it? And I think, we're absolutely at the point now, but we certainly were when the deal was done, that podcasting is an important part of that equation.
Yeah. I mean, it's a really exciting time, isn't it? When you think about the lowering of the barriers to entry right now, when it comes to be able to create a global piece of IP that can start as a podcast and essentially would generally, I suppose, start as here's a question. Knowing what you know now, if you were to start a brand new podcast show, how would you do that? Would you start that as video as being the key important component of it, or is audio? Just give us a sense of, if you were to start a show now, what would it look like?
Well, I think it's definitely not either or in terms of video or audio. I think both of them have to come together. I mean, exactly as you're doing, right? Go where the audiences are. And so if I was starting a show now, I'd absolutely be saying it has to have video from day one. It's got to have a really well thought through and intentional approach to social, because that has to build on what's happening and sort of obviously that's how we're going to go and try and reach people. But audio has to be a really important part of the mix. And I think certainly the past sort of maybe 18 months, 2 years, there's been a narrative going on that sort of audio podcasting is dead and it's all about video now, and it just isn't. I mean, the audience numbers just don't show that in any way at all. And in fact, when you look at research, what you see is that it's not one audience eating the lunch of another audience. They're both compatible with each other. Obviously, I mean, it is the classic thing, just go where audiences are. And some people prefer to watch their podcasts, some people prefer to listen to them. Many people
in many cases, it's a separate audience. It's double the audience.
It's a separate audience, exactly that. And many times you find audiences will switch depending on what it is they're doing. I mean, I've done that with your show. Sometimes I listen to it, and sometimes I've watched it on the telly. So it just depends on that sort of audience behaviour pattern, I think.
Yeah. And there's a number. I mean, Jamie East I'm a big fan of what Jamie East does, and I know he's very keen on audio being audio only, if you like, and a number of podcasts that perhaps try and do both, but potentially waters down the audio because of what they're trying to achieve in video. I mean, that's quite a difficult balance to achieve, I think. I mean, do you? I mean, do you?
Well, I think it's about being cognizant of the audience. Look, I think it's certainly true. At Sony, we developed a very successful true crime channel called The Binge, and clearly that's narrative storytelling. And at the moment, I don't think AI is quite there yet to support that from a video storytelling perspective. I think it's going to come. But as a medium in audio, works absolutely brilliantly. And of course, we were targeting that as to be an audio product for the audience. I think what Jamie has in mind is where, I think we've seen some podcasts launched where, there's jokes that happen on the screen. And of course, if you're listening, you just have no idea what's going on. I mean, actually, I can think of shows like Diary of a CEO that are sort of slightly guilty of that sometimes where, as fantastic as that show is, sometimes Stephen's talking to the audience member and they're using things to demonstrate the point they're making, and as an audio listener you just have no idea what's going on.
Yeah.
And I think that's more down to the production of well, okay, can the host be a bit more cognizant that there is an audio audience as well?
Yeah.
It's no different from what used to happen on the radio. Explain to the audience, draw the pictures, describe what's going on. It doesn't have to actually take away from the video. So again, it's not an either or thing. I don't subscribe to that.
But back to the idea of if you were going to start a new podcast now, would it also need to have the ability for it to go live as well, to be a live show potentially, or something that can eventually be the video aspect of it can be potentially licensed to broadcasters, at a later point in time? I mean, are these all key components of what a modern podcast should incorporate?
Well, they're key components of where a modern podcast can get to, but I don't think that's the same as when you're launching and starting out. I think the most important point to be thinking about is who's the audience, who am I trying to reach, and how can I have that appeal to them? How can I build that community? Because if you can build the audience, then of course all those other things follow.
Yeah.
The live show can come, or there might be some interest from a broadcast, or you can get the merch range going, or frankly, you can just launch products off the back of the podcast that have nothing to do with the podcast.
Yeah.
But the content has to be strong in the first place, and that means having an appeal to an audience and building a community. And I think and actually podcasting and content on YouTube, that I think is the significant thing that those mediums offer that traditional broadcast obviously can't, because it's a one-way conversation.
Yeah, and that's something that we talk about a lot on this show, is about building communities around content, which, as you say, podcasting has really shown the ability to do. So where do you think, in terms of the lives of podcasts, so you were there right at the very beginning and harnessed, the medium and been very successful through it. We're at a stage now, as you say, that podcasts are starting to land on streamers. We're starting to see Channel 4 licensing a lot of their shows onto Spotify, for example, deals going in all different directions. Where do you think we are in terms of the maturity and the development of the podcast industry? Because it feels like it's gone through a number of boom years. Now video is playing more of a role in it. That seems to me to bring much more opportunity. And again, that barrier to entry for a lot of people coming in who may have broadcast experience is even lower. I mean, where do you see the industry on its sort of journey right now?
It's the opportunity is genuinely fantastic, and I feel this is another moment where it's a very exciting inflection point. It's easy to forget 10 years ago there wasn't a podcast industry. I mean, there really wasn't, in the States or here. So this is a baby bit of the entertainment ecosystem. It's a really new bit, and as you say, it's already been through a few iterations. There's been a boom. There's definitely been a slight retrenchment, and now it's coming back again. I think it's a very exciting moment, kind of for some of the points you've just raised. First of all, it's broken out of just being an audio medium, and as I keep saying, it's not either or. It can be both, and that's fine. But also, when you look at the opportunities for sort of regular revenue, some of those are still only just developing at the moment. Some of the more traditional advertising is still in place and is now motoring along, and we're seeing a lot of blue chip clients come in now to replace those original Squarespace and the direct marketing sort of brands who were there in the early days of podcasting. But we're seeing fairly significant changes happening now with Spotify, with YouTube, in terms of how they're going to handle advertising that can sit within podcasts. And that's going to open up even more revenue streams for podcasters, alongside subscription and then all the derivative things you talked about, live and merchandising and all the other opportunities. So all in all, if I was coming into podcasting now, I'd be super excited because we really are still at a very early space and stage for this industry, and there's huge amounts of opportunity still to go.
Yeah, it feels interesting. I mean, if you look at video production for, digital native video production for YouTube, for example, is, it seems like there's a huge amount of saturation across lots of different niches now there. I mean, but podcasting, it doesn't feel like it's got anywhere near that yet. If you've got a genuinely great idea, it just seems there's a lot of space to play within particularly the audio, thinking from podcasting from an audio perspective, it seems like there's much more place to play than video. Would you agree with that?
Well, again, I think that probably goes back to the slight maturity of where the industry is at. I mean, I don't know whether there's necessarily more space. I just think there's huge amounts of opportunity. And I do think we're at a point now with podcasting similar to YouTube that it's not about necessarily creating the biggest show or, YouTube show or sort of audio podcast in the world. It's about getting a sizable audience or an audience that is a niche audience, but which can have value for you. And, I've definitely seen shows that don't necessarily achieve huge audiences, but really achieve really good revenues because they can go to an advertiser and say, if you want to reach people who are into, white sofas, I've got that audience for you. Yeah. And that's really obviously the opportunity that both YouTube and podcasting throw up in a way that I think traditional broadcast doesn't. And even obviously the streamers don't either. Yeah. So, I think the barrier to entry is probably one of the most important points that I think you've made, which is, of course, that is still relevant. If you've got a camera, you've got a good idea, you've got a microphone, you've got a good idea. Yeah. You can make things happen still. Yeah. So you were based in the States for a number of years when you were running the business at Sony. Obviously, that is the biggest entertainment market in the world, both, for video and for audio, and obviously for podcasts. So what did you learn in the States about this sector that perhaps isn't being adopted here, or we've got maybe, how far ahead is the US ahead of the UK, and what do we still have to learn, or what can we still learn from the US business? Well, from my experience, the US is definitely ahead of the UK, but I think that's a sort of, that's something folks have heard for a long time here. Certainly on the podcast front, that was my experience. I mean, that was really why Something Else dived into podcasting, because we went out to the States. I could see what was going on there, and I felt they were 2 or 3 years ahead of us, and that we just needed to, if we didn't jump on it, somebody else would. But when I was there, I could see that in a wider sort of entertainment lens as well, which is it is just some of the things you often hear about the States. It's super entrepreneurial. There is that ability to raise money that I think just doesn't quite happen to the same degree here, and that allows someone who's got a good idea, or a creator who's got a good idea, or a celebrity who wants to get going, creating their own content, to go out and raise some really good money to sort of make that happen. I think there's a much greater risk-taking willingness. I think we're still a little bit cautious here. And that American attitude of sort of looking up and think that I can dream for the stars, which I know as Brits we often sort of laugh at a little bit, is super commendable in many ways, because it does allow people to be really ambitious in their thinking and what they want to do. Yeah,
there isn't the sort of the fear of failure that we seem to have in the UK. I mean, obviously that's a bit of a catch-all statement. There's a lot of people doing a lot of amazing work, but it doesn't seem to be is embedded in our psyche in London, for example, does it? Than perhaps is the ideas that are being bandied about in LA and New York.
Yeah, I think that's right. There's just a bit more cautiousness. Look, I mean, as you said, that's not to say there's not risk taking that goes on, and let's not forget the UK is still one of the creative hotbeds of the world. I mean, when you think about this little island and how much creativity flows out of this place, I actually think as a country we don't trumpet that enough that it's something really positive. When you look across the entertainment industries and the music industry and gaming, filmmaking, all these different areas, we are leaders in so many ways.
Yeah.
And often we just don't shout about it enough.
And creator economy now,
And the creator economy. I mean, you definitely do see, I feel the creator economy, what's happening in that space in the States is a couple of years ahead of here. I'd like us to have 50 sidemens, not one. And that's what you see in the States. And I think the other thing you definitely see in the States is more traditional TV talent has understood the opportunity, or showbiz talent, really, comedians and TV talent, have understood the opportunity to create their own content and then to build entertainment ecosystems around that in terms of being able to sell products and merch and subscriptions and, get people paying for content in lots of different ways, whether that's through Patreon or Apple Podcasts or YouTube. So, you just see that slight greater zeal for entrepreneurialism, I think.
Yeah. And, contrasting that in the UK, I think we still have, certainly a number of TV producers that I still speak to, a lot of indies are still hoping that this whole, that things are going to come back again in the way that they used to be like 5-6 years ago, or certainly pre-pandemic, which, in my opinion, that's just not going to happen. Perhaps a lot of the talent is also waiting for that as well. So, maybe there's a bit of a wake-up call, I think, it's got to happen, I think, with a lot of TV producers, that it's a case of, well, things are not coming back. Try new things. To just change your attitude to risk a little bit more.
Well, I completely agree. And, the TV world has changed significantly. Radio has changed significantly. And that's not to say those traditional mediums don't have a place. Of course they do. But the idea that it's going to be as it was, I don't think is true. And yet, if I was a TV producer now, I'd be looking at the amount of opportunity there is because of the consumption that's going on YouTube, because podcasting can give me a route in that doesn't cost very much and allows me to take a few risks. And I'd be thinking, well, this can open up really fantastic new doors for me that gets me away from that commissioning model. And look, that's slightly a route that Something Else went down. For many years, our business was trying to get commissions with the BBC or get brands
radio
to pay
commissions, essentially. Yeah,
radio commissions, a little bit of TV, certainly online stuff, getting brands to pay us to sort of make content. And of course, we were able to transform into an IP-led business. And when you can do that, the value you can just build into your business just explodes exponentially. So certainly for traditional TV producers, that's where my head would be going, is sort of not to throw the baby out with the bathwater. There's still obviously some business to be chased there. And if you're a good TV producer, you're clearly going to still get plenty of fantastic opportunity. But I'll be looking at this as the additional thing that allows me to become a broader multi-content business than just a TV producer.
Yeah. We've obviously seen some fantastic companion podcasts like Traitors, for example, and a number of others. So they're starting to appear as their own TV shows and being played out in broadcast. Do you see that building? Because presumably, a lot of the broadcasters, their budgets are falling as the advertising is going towards social and has gone towards social. They've still got the same amount of hours to fill in terms of schedules. There's more and more high quality content being produced in terms of video podcasts that can run on TV. Surely that is answering the issues that a lot of the broadcasters have about them, filling their hours with still great content that is, that looks slightly different. Like we're here, if you're watching on YouTube, you see, we're here on sofas talking with mics in front of us. But I think people, because of the different ways that people are experiencing content through their YouTube app, for example, at home, they're becoming used to watching a different type of TV. Do you see that as a big growth area? But video podcasts playing out on broadcast networks?
Well, I think really what this is about is fandom, and it's not necessarily about filling hours or even the cost of production. It's about looking at how you develop that fandom. And actually, companion podcasts have been the very first dip in the water. Frankly, I don't think the Traitors has gone far enough, right? There's a massive, massive hit on the BBC. I'd be looking at that and saying, well, hang on, okay, we've got the sort of spin-off, companion show that's happening, but why don't we do a watch-along podcast as well. You know, what's our Gogglebox version of that, where we can see fans reacting? You know, what's the maybe additional layers of content we can offer each day of the week whilst it's on, that just develops that fandom and builds that up? What is the live show? You know, actually maybe we should be taking it on the road and doing it at the O2, you know, in front of 20,000 people, because they would sell that out, you know, instantly. Yeah. So I think, but my point being really is about that's all about different ways to feed the audience and build up that fandom and community. And by doing that obviously then turns on other revenue opportunities for you as well. Yeah.
No, it really is an exciting time, because I think you know, a lot of traditional TV production companies, they've got all the transferable skill sets and in many cases the talent relationships to be able to, as you said, you know, create a new go into business with a celebrity to create a new show, you know, and they've got all of those connections and the ability to create a fantastic looking show. It's I'm surprised that there aren't more opportunities being picked up.
But I think the skill that some of those companies still lack is agility. You know, just that ability to say, well, this is the way we used to do it, and we'd have, you know, a 200-person crew, and now we're going to do it. I mean, you know, we're here with one other person in the room, and that's how you're producing a great bit of visual and audio content, right? Yeah. So, you know, if that doesn't frighten the life out of traditional TV producers, I don't know what will. You know, the fact that you can do this and you can create something that can hopefully earn you a little bit of money as well, and get a bit of advertising in, you know, throws up an opportunity. So for those traditional TV production companies, I think that agility and that entrepreneurialism is really important. It's also the ability to back yourself, to say, actually, I'm just going to launch some stuff and see how it goes down with the audience, and we'll tweak it and change it as we go along. We'll figure it out as we get that feedback coming from the audience, which obviously traditional TV doesn't allow you to do.
Yeah. So where do you see next 3 years? I know it's a long horizon, 3 years. Where do you see the next 3 years going when it comes to podcasting then? Where we're going to be in 3 years' time?
I think we're going to see some much more developed revenue models. I mean, look, the advertising model is very strong now and is only growing. You know, it really is. There's a big movement now.
Are you talking about brand funding there, or are you talking about purely advertising?
I'm talking about advertising, okay. Yeah. I mean, funnily enough, the brand funded model is also growing pretty quickly. I mean, certainly in Sony days, you know, we were working with brands like Rolex and Chanel who were spending significant amounts of money for Sony Music Podcast to create branded shows for those brands. But I am talking about the traditional advertising. I think alongside that, subscription is really, really exciting. It throws up an opportunity that actually content often hasn't had, with those micro payments, because someone who's a subscriber is far more valuable to you than a listener who you just advertise to, because obviously they're in every month, right? And and we all know from our own subscriptions, maybe every few years we suddenly look at it and go, I'll cancel that. But you're in. And you know, Patreon is now becoming a very significant player, is actually starting to do some really interesting deals with content providers to incentivize them to bring content to that platform. YouTube obviously throws up huge opportunities. Apple Podcasts and Spotify also do as well. So I think the subscription piece, the advertising piece, and of course the derivative model. We've seen podcasts in the UK playing to huge arenas and you know, really putting in significant money on that side, and that's only going to keep increasing as well, I think.
And then finally, Steve, tell us about can you tell us about what you're going to be doing next? I mean, you've got January off. You've told me that.
I have.
You haven't told me anything else though. Any clues about what your next move might be?
Yeah, I mean, no great secrets really. I'm sort of aiming to work with a range of companies now. You know, I've had 30 plus years of running teams and running businesses, and I had great fun along the way, but it's quite tiring as well. Yeah. So, you know, and I feel like I've picked up a lot of knowledge now with that experience in the States, obviously taking a company to exit. So I'm looking forward to working with a range of businesses. Some of those will be in the podcast space, but a bunch of them will be in the wider entertainment spaces. And also, I think, you know, it's going to be businesses that are both sort of small, medium businesses that are looking to go on that journey through to exit, but also some larger ones that are just trying to understand the content ecosystem a little bit better. So so the plan is hopefully
consulting for a
lot of different things. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Well, now it's time for Story of the Week. We're going to go through Story of the Week, Hero of the Week, and find out who or what you're going to tell to get in the bin.
Let's do it.
All right. So first of all, what's your story of the week?
Story of the week, I think actually very prescient. Some of the stuff we've been chatting about was Global's acquisition of Gary Neville's podcast business. I mean, Gary Neville, for those who don't know, ex-footballer, very famous football pundit, but comes with a very large video audience. The shows that his company make, and also an audio audience as well. Global is one of those more traditional legacy media businesses, and yet has clearly shown a great hunger and aptitude to start to sort of pivot a little bit and get into this space. You know, they bought the Fella Studio,
that's right,
sort of influencer-based shows last year, which I thought was an interesting move, and now adding this one on, I think is super interesting. So yeah, I think it's a significant story, and it touches on lots of things we've chatted about, really.
Yeah.
You know, creatives making their own content, or sort of celebs making their own content, the ecosystem, and you know, the fact that, look, you know what they bought. I think Gary Neville launched those shows about 3 years ago. So you know, you think about that acquisition route. That's a pretty short time span.
Yeah, and it's a great time to buy them just ahead of the World Cup, of course. And we've also seen what Goalhanger are doing, and a lot of deals that they're doing with Netflix and everything. So it's going to be a lot of opportunities next year around the World Cup, aren't there? So. Yeah. Okay. So that's your story of the week. Gary Neville's not my favourite pundit, but anyway, he's a great businessman. So how about your hero of the week? Who are you going to shout out?
Hero of the week, I have to choose Claudia Winkleman, because obviously in the past week they announced about the chat show, which I think everyone knew was coming. Obviously, The Traitors is back with a new season, and again is, you know, absolutely smashing it. So and frankly, I think, you know, you always want to see success going to sort of really good people, and I'm sure, same as you, I've worked with lots and lots of different names over the years, and I did have the sort of pleasure of working with her a little bit a while back, and I've got to say she was absolutely delightful, and so good for her. You know, great to see all that happening for her. Well,
that's good to hear. You know, it seems to be more often the case when you're talking about a celeb, and then it's like they were a nightmare to work with. But actually, that's great to hear that. You know, she's great on screen as she is off. And what about getting in the bin? Who or what are you gonna throw in the bin?
I am going to put in the bin Larry and David Ellison, because again, you know, they're obviously behind Paramount and trying to buy Warner Brothers Discovery. And for those who sort of watched these things last week, the WBD board recommended they turn down the offer from Paramount. And I thought what was really interesting was when you read what the board had to say to their shareholders. If you read between the lines, what they're basically saying is, we don't believe they have the money to support this deal. And when you think what that throws up in terms of credibility and character, that raises some pretty unfortunate question marks, I think. And, you know, they're trying to be very aggressive in how they can try and get that deal done. I think they are going to struggle to do it, you know, unless Trump really swings behind them and just blocks Netflix. You know, it's got a way to go, this whole journey, because of the regulatory stuff. But yeah, no, I think those two can go in the bin this week.
All right. Yeah. Okay, the Ellisons are getting in the bin. Steve, thank you so much for joining me this week.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
I've wanted to have you on the show for ages, so I'm really glad that we could make it work. So thank you for joining us. And listen, all the best for 2026 with new consultancy work.
Thank you, Justin. Well, look, it's been great being here. Brilliant fun. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, that's all for this week's show. Telecast was produced by Spirit Studios and recorded in London. We'll be back next week with another show. In the meantime, stay safe.